Hello, Learn to Love listeners. Before we start this episode, I wanted to begin with a very special announcement that my new book, Love and Suffering, a spiritual guide for helpers, healers, and humans, will be coming out on September 1st, and you can pre-order the book today. Featuring numerous insights from many of my podcast guests, the book will take you on a profound and enlightening journey across spiritualities of the world and the latest science to find the unifying field of love and suffering behind them all. If you're looking for God, purpose, freedom from suffering, or simply greater ease in your relationships, then this is the book for you. Check out the link in the show notes. Thanks so much.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Learn to Love podcast, your guide to everything love, sex, intimacy, and relationships. Each week, your host, Zach Beach, interviews new experts on love, including couples therapists, relationship coaches, sex educators, and best-selling authors. Learn the best tips and cutting-edge wisdom to better love yourself, others, and the world. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, beautiful souls. I'm so positively delighted that you could join us on the Learn to Love podcast. I am your host, Zach Beach, and for today's episode, we have the incredible psychotherapist, author, speaker, fellow podcast host, and relationship coach, Dr. Zoe Shaw. After 15 years of her private psychotherapy practice, Dr. Zoe wanted to share her wisdom and experience with the world and began her online educational and coaching programs. She is the author of A Year of Self-Care, Daily Practices and Inspiration for Caring for Yourself, and the author of the Ask Dr. Zoe column in the Grit and Grace Project Women's Magazine. She has been published in OprahMag.com, Recovery Today Magazine, Forbes, and Today.com. Dr. Zoe came onto the show to talk about her upcoming book, Stronger in the Difficult Places, to be released by Penguin Random House Waterbrook Division this September. Her book is all about unpacking and understanding shame, particularly the deep, complex shame that becomes part of our identity and isn't so easy to let go of. And while I hate to be the bearer of bad news, while you might think that shame doesn't come up in your relationships, Dr. Zoe says that everyone feels shame, and it's impossible to be in a relationship without feeling it. So learning how to shame-proof our relationship can help us all. So without further ado, let's begin. Hello, Dr. Zoe. Welcome to the Learn to Love podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Zach. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on, for taking time out of your busy day and schedule to come on to talk about your new book, Stronger in the Difficult Places. So congrats on getting this little body of work out into the world. It was an absolute joy to read. And the tagline for your book is Heal Your Relationship with Yourself by Untangling Complex Shame. So in the introduction, you use these terms: simple, complex, and toxic shame. So tell us about this.
You know, I think it's so important to understand this, especially in the context of relationships, because of what shame does to us in relationships. So when I think about shame, I think first it's important. Most people know this already, but just in case people don't, to understand the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is a very productive emotion. It is a feeling that tells you you've done something wrong, and it's productive when it's valid, because of course, sometimes guilt's not valid, and that's a whole nother thing. But when it's valid, it's productive because it's a message that's sent to you, essentially. All emotions are messages that we're sending to ourselves that says that we've done something wrong. We've broken our moral code. And the reason why guilt is productive is because it's kind of not attached to our identity. We've done something that's broken our moral code. So there's fixes, right? We can do something to change that. We can go and apologize. We can choose not to do that thing anymore. We can do something about it. Shame, though, shame says I am wrong. It's attached to who you are as a person. And the problem with that is that when you've told yourself or someone else has told yourself you are wrong, there's nothing you can do about that except hide. And so shame makes us hide. Now, there's simple shame, and I call it simple shame. It's kind of what Brene Brown talks about a lot. So there's shame that we all experience as humans. We experience as early as 2 years old, 18 months, maybe even. And shame is that emotion that says, I am wrong. And what happens with simple shame is that when you talk about it and you experience compassion outside from someone else, shame actually disappears. It's why the Me Too movement happened, right? When you get that sense of someone else is like, me too, and it's okay, then all of a sudden the shame disappears, because shame makes us feel different then and unaccepted. When someone accepts us, the shame disappears. That's what happens with simple shame. With complex shame, which is what I talk about the most, toxic shame is a more severe form, but with complex shame, when we express our vulnerability and maybe we experience compassion, it doesn't work. And so instead, what happens is there's a part of us that says, oh, but you don't really understand. You don't know. And instead, our shame goes deeper. We're not able to accept that level of compassion. Now, sometimes with complex shame, we may express vulnerability and then we're gaslit about what we're feeling shame about. Like, oh, that's not real. That didn't happen. And that can happen a lot for marginalized communities. There's no understanding. There's no compassion. And so then the same thing happens. Our shame just spirals deeper. Right?
What's an example of expressing one's shame and being gaslit about it?
So let's say that there is an African-American professional in a corporate environment, and there's microaggressions that they experience, and they go to their HR department, and their HR department says, nah, that's not real. You're just overreacting. That's not really happening. We don't have a culture of that in our corporate environment, right? And so they walk away instead of feeling understood, instead of feeling validated. Instead, their shame just goes deeper. And then they create stories about maybe there is something wrong with me, maybe, or I'm just not understood in society. So that's an example of how somebody's shame can turn into complex shame and go deeper. Toxic shame is a little different. Toxic shame is usually created very early in life by trauma, neglect, toxic messages. That does get attached also very deeply to an identity. And it's just it's a little harder to untangle. And it's not really my focus. My focus is complex shame.
Well, I'm already learning so much from you. I like this idea that simple shame, when we talk about it and experience compassion and understanding about the issue, the shame disappears.
It does. Yeah.
It just speaks to the power of love and being seen and honored.
It does. Yeah. Yeah. And that's really what we all desire inside of a relationship, right? Is to be seen and loved as we are.
And I do like this distinction that we feel guilty when we have done something wrong, but shame is this belief that I am wrong. I heard you say that guilt can be productive and that all emotions are messengers. What would you say shame is? Is it also an emotion? Is it something else?
It's been described as emotion. It's been described as a brain state. Shame is also a body state. So just like trauma, and I believe that shame is a type of trauma, a micro trauma maybe, or it could be a big T trauma, depending on what the shame is about. So it is both an emotion, but it is also a body state, if that makes sense. We hold shame in our body. You can see shame on people's bodies. And so part of the maintenance of shame is also getting it out of our bodies, similar to trauma.
And would you say it's also a messenger, or is helpful, or maybe was evolutionarily advantageous in a certain way, but now is no longer?
Those are great questions. Those are excellent questions. My professional opinion is that all shame is unhealthy. There are people that don't agree with that. And part of the reason why they don't agree with that is because shame has been used as a tool really since the beginning of time, right? Shame has been used to keep people in society acting the way that they should, or at least it seems that way. So if we go back to a time in society when you could easily be ostracized for not conforming, right? Shame, which was still unhealthy at that point, but it kept you alive, possibly, if you hid your behavior. And the reason why I say that is because shaming people, and especially in lots of faith traditions, shame is used as a tool to control. And the problem is, in the moment, it looks like it works. And so for parents sometimes shame their children. Authority shames the people that they are ruling over to get a behavior to stop. And it looks like it works so well. Research has shown it does not. When you shame somebody, you do not eliminate the behavior. The behavior just goes underground because remember, shame causes us to hide. And so it looks like it does, but it doesn't. So historically, yes, it did work in the sense that maybe it kept you alive if you were living a shameful life and you hid, but it kept you as being accepted and part of a community. Okay, we can say that it kept you alive. Was it healthy? No. But now that we live in a different type of society, one that we can be canceled on social media, right? There's definitely cancel society or cancel culture, but we're not really going to be ostracized from our existence, from our communities, because we may have a different viewpoint or think differently or have a different type of lifestyle than other people have. And so even more now, shame is unhealthy in all aspects because it causes us to hide, because it causes us to feel that I am bad. So my opinion, my professional opinion is that shame is unhealthy all the time. Now, sometimes people have, I think that we get into a semantic talk about, well, is it guilt or is it shame? Guilt, healthy, shame, not.
I'm getting the sense from you that shame is unhealthy on both a personal and societal level, that personally it creates much suffering,
Yep.
but also on a societal level, it doesn't help solve whatever problem it's intended to solve.
It doesn't. It just looks like it does. That's why people say, oh, shame on you, or you should feel shame, or they feel no shame as if that's a bad thing because we've been socialized to believe that shame is good.
So what are some of the common things that we feel shame about?
We feel shame about, especially in religious communities, we feel shame about our relationship with God or that we're not living up to those standards, right? We can feel shame about our sexual identity or just how we show up in terms of our, if we're being feminine or masculine or not enough. We can feel shame about our body type, right? About just our bodies in general. We can have imposter syndrome where we feel like we didn't deserve the thing that we've accomplished in our work, or we're not good enough, or if people really knew that I didn't understand as much as they thought I did, that, they wouldn't give me this position or authority. We feel comparison shame. Right? It's huge on social media when we look at somebody else and somebody else's life that we compare ourselves to. And I think this is really important because shame is a social construct. In the absence of others, we do not feel shame. So if you think about yourself like in your bedroom, naked, you're not feeling shame. Now, if someone walks in the room, all of a sudden you want to cover up, right? And all of a sudden you may feel some body shame if that's existing in your life. But it's only in relation to others. However, with social media and all the types of media that we have in the world, we can now experience shame in our bedrooms when no one else is there because we look at something that we compare ourselves to. It's still a social comparison, but it's even kind of more insidious because of the fact that it's just always there for us.
No, I'm hearing some very big topics here that we feel shame around spirituality, around sexuality, around our body and body image that, of course, gets deepened and accentuated with social media. And then our career, the imposter syndrome. So covers so many areas of our life.
Yes, it does.
So another two terms that you use in your book is internalizer and externalizer. So what are those?
Oh yeah, this is interesting because when we talk about what happens with people who have complex shame, they tend to be internalizers. So one of the other consequences, I should say, of complex shame is also codependency, which is a thing that I specialize in. And so people who tend to be internalizers, actually, let me go back to explaining the difference between like personality and temperament and how this is developed. So we are all born with a temperament. We are born with that. When we come out of our mother's bodies, we have temperaments. It's part of just the way that we are made up. We are not born with a personality though. And so our temperament over time interacts with the world, whatever our world looks like, and we develop a personality. Now historically they said personalities solidify between 7, 10, and are basically unchangeable. That research is changing now. And we found that personalities can be a little more malleable over time, but we are not born with personalities. We're born with temperaments and interact with our environment and create personalities. And so Another thing that kind of develops is this ability to kind of be an internalizer and an externalizer. It may be more temperament based than it is personality based, but what that means is that for internalizers, we tend to take on everything and really internalize it, meaning take responsibility, blame for things that often aren't even our issue. Our shame, we point inward, right? And we hold on to it. We do something that I call co-signing with other people's shame that they put on us. We may co-sign with toxic messages. People who are externalizers tend to take all of the shame that they feel and they spew it out on everybody else. They do not tend to internalize it, right? And so those people are the people that we may deem as toxic people that, take their shame and spew it out on people who are like the internalizers, maybe the codependent people who kind of take it in and try to control in different ways. And so I think it's important for people to understand, am I an internalizer or am I an externalizer? And sometimes we can switch between the two depending on relationships that we're in, life stages that we're in. And sometimes we aren't more of one than the other, but most of us tend to be more of one than we are the other. And if you are an internalizer, it's important to begin to work on externalizing some of your emotions, some of your thoughts and feelings so that you are not continually blaming yourself, right? And holding yourself accountable for things that aren't yours to hold on to. If you are an externalizer, you need to actually be able to take some accountability and hold some things, because really the middle is where the health is.
I love those distinctions. Lately, I've been thinking about this idea that if we don't transform our pain, we will transmit it.
Oh,
and
yes.
that's the externalizers. They
Yeah.
dump their own stuff onto others. And when you
Right.
mentioned how the internalizers blame themselves, even when it's not their fault, I'm thinking just about children and how children who often grow up with challenging parents that get divorced, they think
Yes.
something's wrong with me. I must have
Right.
done something.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We'll either transmit the pain by blowing it out on somebody else, or we will take it out on ourselves.
So I know we're here to talk about complex shame, but I want to go back to this idea you mentioned earlier about how when we do share our simple shame with
Yes.
somebody who is compassionate, it dissipates.
Right.
And how we can bring this into our relationships, because I think many of us are afraid to share even the simplest of shame in our
Yes.
relationships, and have probably experienced situations where we did share something that was shameful, but it wasn't received in the correct way.
Yes. That's the most painful.
Yeah, how do we cultivate that space in relationship where we can have those conversations to alleviate the things that we are shameful about?
Mm-hmm. That's such a great question. I think the first step is learning to accept our own shame, is learning to use those words, which I use in my relationship, like, oh, that's a shame trigger. I feel shame about that. And then when you're able to start talking about it, like we said, it does help alleviate it. But the first step is to do it for yourself. So the places where you can recognize shame in your life are the places that you hide. So whenever you're communicating with somebody, whenever you're, in a relationship and you notice you want to hide, that's exactly where your shame is. So that's how you pinpoint it for yourself. And most people, when they want to hide, they follow through on that behavior and they hide in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes it's a facade. Sometimes it's outright lying. Sometimes it's just just literally hiding and deceiving someone, not wanting someone to see those dark spaces, not mentioning it, right? And so what I ask you to do is that when you recognize, oh, I feel like I want to hide there, that you identify it for yourself. Oh, that's shame. Name it. And then instead of hiding, go towards it. How can I go towards that shame and open it up and look at it and talk about it? Maybe I'm not ready to do it with my partner yet, but how can I do that with me? How can I understand where that shame came from? What are the voices? What are the messages that I've brought with me? So here's what often happens is our shame stories begin early in relationships. And we develop these messages about who we are, about ourselves. And sometimes when we leave relationships that we may deem unhealthy, or just we leave relationships in general, we think we're leaving all of that shame. But what we really do is we pack it up and we just carry it with us and we take it on about our lives. And now we perpetuate that shame on ourselves, right? We begin to tell ourselves the same shame story. And then we co-sign. So we co-sign with the people who kind of put the shame on us. And then we find other people in our lives who co-sign with that shame too, which makes us want to double down on not sharing it because we've already connected with people that we know co-sign with that shame, if that makes sense. And so what we have to do is start to not co-sign with it, but we have to understand where those messages came from in the beginning. And once we get to a place of acceptance of our shame, once we get to a place of self-forgiveness where we forgive ourselves for the things that we did to ourselves or all the things that we did to ourselves when we were running from our shame, then we start the work of talking about it out loud in our relationships. And the goal at that point isn't necessarily to receive compassion and understanding from our partner. The goal actually is for us to be able to speak our shame regardless of whether we get compassion and understanding back.
That sounds quite the challenge.
It is a challenge. It's doable, though. It is doable. And that's why in the end of every single chapter of my book, I have a section of hope, because I hate those books where you read and you just read about how screwed up you are and you just feel so yucky. At the end of every chapter in my book, I say, but there's hope. There's hope that, number one, you can do this. There's hope that you can overcome this. There's hope that you can feel joy and the maintenance part of overcoming your shame. So it is possible.
Well, I'm hearing from you how important the personal work is. We do the work on ourselves first and then bring that work and development into the relationship so that it's not so dependent on how our partner responds.
Correct. My tagline for my podcast is, we're fixing you, we're not fixing them, and that changes everything.
Well, that's an interesting segue into my next question because that this idea of fixing implies perhaps there's something about us, that's broken and wrong. Yeah. And I am curious, when we talk about this idea of complex shame, how we work with it, like recognizing it's unhealthy, right? Is it like a tumor that needs to be excised? Is it something we need to let go of? Or is it like a wound that needs to be attended to so that healing can come from the inside? How do we approach this challenging situation?
That's great. And I love what you said too, because we could interchange that word with changing. You know, if people are in difficult relationships, if people recognize that they do have shame in their life, I do feel that that's something that would benefit you to change and or fix, whichever word feels better for you. And the reality is we are always, I hope we are always growing and changing. And I think for most of us, that should be a goal as we go about life. And so it's not you're broken and you need to be fixed, but it's you're human. And I'm hoping that you'll want to grow as you continue in your life. And part of that is identifying some shame in your life and the ways that you hide and the ways that you impede your relationship because of the hiding. So I look at it as maybe a wound that needs to be healed, but it's also an ongoing thing, because once you go through the stages of really working on and untangling your shame. Like I said, shame is a social construct. It does not go away, and that's okay. And I look at shame kind of like grief. Our goal is to really weave it into the tapestry of our life in a healthy way so that when shame shows up in my life now, I can go, I know what that is. That's shame. I see that. Wow, that hurt, or that's shame. I immediately identify it, and I'm immediately able to tackle it and let it just go away in the moment, because I know exactly what it is and I know exactly what to do with it. It's not that it will never show up. It shows up regularly.
I like how you're emphasizing how the tendency is to hide. Like, I'm thinking of the situation where the breadwinner of the relationship loses their job. And rather than talk about it, they leave the house and sit in their car in a parking lot for 8 hours. And that's exactly the hiding and fear that comes up when we do have things we feel ashamed about.
Right.
And I like how you're talking about it being this social construct, because we do in our society kind of have this idea that, you are worth as much as you make, and and how much you can provide for your family. So those messages, maybe they will go away in a few decades. They're always going to be there. So we must, so you have to do the work no matter what.
of learning to live with them, and also learning to recognize what's valid, what's not valid. And the lie that we tell ourselves is that, and it starts with if they know, right? If I tell my wife, then, and usually the then is catastrophic. And what I know about shame, and what I really hope that your listeners can hear, is that the burden that we carry when we hide is not worth whatever the words are that it takes to speak it. And I've learned that in my life. I've carried shame for decades. And when I finally spoke it and nothing happened, all the catastrophic things that I thought would happen didn't happen, I realized how much of that burden had affected my life, and I allowed it to, when it wasn't even the thing that I imagined it to be. And I can guarantee you that whatever you're hiding, your shame is not the thing that you imagine it to be. And yes, if you have some crazy story, number one, there's nothing new under the sun. Your story is not that unique. But if you have that crazy story that you've been holding on to, what will happen is that you'll share it. And the thing that you think will happen is not at all what will likely happen. People may talk. They may talk for 5 minutes. They may talk about it. And then they go back to worrying about their own shame. And they go back to talking about other things. And it's not worth the burden that you carry in your life and on your relationships and in your career. It's not worth that.
That's such a beautiful insight. The burden we carry when we hide is not worth whatever the words are that it takes to speak it.
Correct. It's not. Yeah.
So our official topic for today is on shame-proof relationships.
How do we shame-proof our relationships?
Yeah. How do we?
Well, the first thing I want you to understand is that when you are carrying shame in your relationship, you don't actually feel loved. And so what happens is, remember, when you have shame, you hide. When you hide and someone loves you, they're loving a facade of you, and you know that. And so when someone loves you or says, I loved you, there's a part of you that says, oh, but if you knew, then you wouldn't love me. And so you can be in relationship with somebody who loves you, and you are feeling very unloved, whether you're consciously aware of it or not. And then you're going to react to them as if they don't love you. And so by shame-proofing your relationship, which means you speak the hard things, you have the hard conversations, you allow your partner to see you, then when they love you, all of a sudden you feel loved, and then you respond to them with that love as well. And that's the danger of not doing that, is that, you have the cycle that I talked about before. But it's hard.
Well, exactly. You said speak the hard things, have the hard conversations, allow your partner to see you. The key adjective is hard. This is how hard it can be.
And the hard gets easier. So the thing is that when you first start having hard conversations, and my partner and I have this conversation, it's like, okay, time for hard conversation. Then we know it's just a little red flag kind of that we wave, and we have our hard conversation, and then it's gone. And when, I think about it, because I know that there are men out there in very difficult relationships where they've got buckets and buckets of hard conversations that probably needed to happen over the years. And so it can feel like they're in this pressure cooker, right? And like, if I let some of that steam out, the whole thing is just going to freaking explode. And I understand that feeling. And yet what I know is that no matter how deep that well is, it is not endless. And if you just start letting out a little bit of steam, over time, you will get to a place where you've let all the steam out. And when you can get to a place in a relationship where you are addressing things immediately, and you are addressing them regularly, and you are uncovering your shame regularly, there is so much freedom in that relationship. So let me give you an example of practically what I do in my relationship. We have a weekly meeting that we call an all-in, and I actually suggest this in all of my couples therapy. And during this all-in, we do 3 things. We start out with appreciation, because everybody loves to be appreciated, and you should be appreciating your partner in some way, shape, or form. And in the appreciation, we just express everything that we appreciated about our partner in that past week. And then we have something that we call do differently. And so that do differently is where we actually ask our partner, hey, listen, this thing you did this week didn't really work for me, or this wasn't okay, or this came up for me. And we're asking our partner, like, can you do this differently? And you can address it in any way you want to. And then there's, I'm going to be vulnerable, right? So we have
step 3.
Step 3.
Okay.
It's actually with the do differently. So it's you do differently and I do differently. And the do differently part is I'm going to be vulnerable. So it's appreciation, do differently, which includes being vulnerable. And that's I need you to do this differently. And I'm going to be vulnerable and really share some of my shame stuff with you essentially, because I need this addressed. And then there's how can you show me love in this next week coming up? If you are doing a practice like that every single week with your partner and you are honest, shame's not going to exist in your relationship. Or when shame bubbles up, you will immediately say, oh, that was a shame trigger. Maybe we'll talk about that on our all in. Or maybe we'll just sit and talk about it now. But when you get in the practice of using those words and identifying shame, both of you feel very accepted.
So that step 3 is where you ask your partner or you tell your partner what they can do for you in the following week so that you feel loved.
Yes. This is how you can show me love in this next week. Yes.
So appreciation, do differently, what you can do and what I'll do, because I feel like that piece is so key. It's so easy to tell a partner all the things that they could be doing differently.
Yes.
But yeah, you bring up vulnerability of admitting, okay, there are things I can also do differently.
And I've found that practice, it's impossible to not have emotional intimacy in a relationship or a marriage when you're doing that weekly. And it's also hard for shame to take root.
Well, I love that step. I have to ask you if you have other practical steps we can do to further shame-proof our relationship.
Well, like I said, it's noticing when you want to hide. And that's the time that you need to speak up to your partner and even just say, I realize I don't want to tell you this, or I realize I wanted to hide this from you, which I do regularly. And then I might explore with him, like, I'm wondering what that is. And maybe as I'm thinking about it, it has something to do with the way you reacted last week when I said this to you. And I feel like that's making me want to hide now. I think that's shame. So it's really being willing to identify that shame. And then also being willing to identify shame in your partner, being willing to recognize the times that you're shaming your partner. Because sometimes in our language, we will make our partner feel shame and then recognize it and say, hey, I think maybe I shamed you when I said, what's wrong with you? Or why did you do that? Or why can't you ever? Right? When you make these broad global statements. So whenever we're making global statements towards somebody, we're talking about who they are as a person instead of talking about something they did. And so it's really important to make that distinction when we're talking to our children, when we're talking to our partner, that we're talking about an action they did rather than who they are as a person. Because if you're talking negatively about who they are as a person, you're shaming them. And then recognizing it when you may be doing those shaming behaviors and bring it up to them and say, I think maybe I caused you some shame. I think maybe I was shaming you in that moment. What could I do differently next time?
That's so interesting. I feel like before this conversation, I did think of shame as a sort of tribal emotion, like felt like an exclusion from the group and that we were shamed from our society. But I'm definitely hearing almost two things. One, we all have an internalized shame that then gets triggered in relationships, but also it can be very much dyadic that just one person, our most intimate partner, can press in those wounds. So let's say I do notice my partner having some shame about something. And I do want to, again, acknowledge very much so your emphasis on working on ourselves first and taking responsibility for our own stuff. But we can also often see blind spots that our partners can't see. If they're like, even if they just say, I'm so ashamed of like this part of my body, right? You mentioned earlier, spirituality, sexuality, body, job, career. I feel like in our intimate moments, feeling self-conscious about our body comes up. How can we best support our partner in healing their own complex shame?
Yeah. I think becoming curious is helpful. And a lot of times people don't want to ask questions, especially when someone talks about their own shame. They just want to say, oh, you're fine. Oh, no, you don't need to feel shame about that. Right?
Yeah. And you're so beautiful.
And that doesn't always help. I mean, sometimes it does over time, but I think actually getting curious helps more. Like, where did you get that message that your body or that body part or whatever it is shameful? When did you start feeling that? Getting curious and allowing them to actually have a conversation with you about that can allow them to actually feel heard and not dismissed by just saying you're beautiful, right? Because although that sounds like a really wonderful thing to say, it can also be very dismissive. And so getting curious is a great way to help people talk through their shame. And asking, how can I support you in that feeling? How can I support you in working on getting rid of that feeling or healing that issue is even better after you first become curious and given them the opportunity to talk about it.
I'm noticing quite the analogy to psychotherapy also, the healing qualities of both relationships.
Yes. It is true that, and it's one of the reasons why psychotherapy can be healing is because as therapists, what do we become? We become very curious about our people. And often, people are out there in the world and there aren't a lot of people that are actually curious about them, that want to see them. And that can feel very healing to have somebody actually see you and want to understand who you are and how you came to be and why you are that way in a way that's very accepting. It's extremely healing.
I've kind of an odd question. I'm curious your thoughts on, the topic for this show is going to be shame-proof relationships. And I'm curious for the folks who think that shame is not something that comes up in their relationship and that it's not an issue. Do you think that some people just were lucky enough to grow up without having shame indoctrinated into their being? Or is it sort of more common that people don't recognize the hidden ways that shame does show up, or even recognize that actually that thing that you're experiencing, that's shame?
Yeah, I would love to be able to say that some people don't experience it, but this is not one of those things. Everybody experiences shame. The level matters, right? And everyone doesn't experience shame on the same level that everybody else does. But it is really impossible to be in relationship without feeling shame. And sometimes even, it can show up in the ways that you are overcompensating. So you might not actually feel like, oh, I feel bad about myself or I need to hide necessarily. You might not get that thought in your head, but you may feel like you need to show up as a perfectionist, that you need to do everything right, that you need to make sure that you're making your partner feel good all of the time, that, there's other ways that shame shows up. And all of that goes back to, because if I show up as maybe how I really feel in that moment, I will not be accepted, right? And so it's a different type of hiding by overcompensating. And so if you really don't ever feel that sense of shame, which is hard to believe, sometimes we desensitize ourselves to it to such an extent that it's really denial, that we push it away and don't see it. But if you do tend to be that kind of overcompensator, you tend to have codependency, you tend to be that very, big empath in relationships, and you tend to sacrifice yourself to help others. And maybe you just think, I'm just a giver, or I'm just, super empathic. But you may see that there are patterns that you are trying to hide about yourself to be accepted by somebody else.
So I've noticed you brought up this idea of codependency a few times, and I'm sensing that the more complex shame that we experience, almost the more likely we are to find ourselves in a codependent relationship.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
That would be accurate. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. So, okay, I'm on the right track. So I'm curious real quick, how do you define or think of a codependent relationship? And then again, what is that connection between the complex shame and codependency?
So I'm just going to give a simple, it's not necessarily a definition, but something that you can kind of recognize. And I see this in my clients a lot, is that when something happens in a relationship, maybe something that's going to cause some kind of emotional reaction, they'll start to use the sentence or the words like, we were upset, or this, this happened to us and we felt. And so part of a way that you can identify codependency is this uncomfortability with your partner having a different emotional state than you have in the moment. This desire to control your partner's emotions. So a lot of people think of codependency as being weak and being manipulated. Actually, people who are codependent are actually manipulators and they are actually controlling. And what they don't realize, because they may seem like they're just overgiving and they're always there and they self-sacrifice, right, to make a partner happy. But the reason why they're doing that is to control the emotions of their partner such that they feel accepted and validated. They feel very uncomfortable if their partner is uncomfortable, and they feel a need to make their partner feel comfortable so that they feel accepted and validated. That is kind of the description of codependency.
And then what is the connection with complex shame?
Well, it is based in shame that if I just show up as myself, right? And when we show up as individuals, we are going to interact with people who feel differently and think differently than we do. And when we have shame about who we are, we cannot feel okay if someone else is not validating us, if someone else is not experiencing kind of a similar emotion than we are, someone else judges us. Our shame prevents us from being able to show up in that way and allow other people to just have their feelings. So I don't want to make you upset because then that means that you don't accept me. And I need to be accepted because I feel so much shame and I need you to accept me. So I'm going to make you happy so that you'll be happy with me. And it's a never ending cycle and it's exhausting. And once again, we're not feeling loved because we're not showing up as ourselves and we're not really saying, hey, I have needs and my needs matter. And can we have some reciprocity here? Can you meet my need and I'll be happy to meet yours? That's terrifying for someone in a codependent relationship because their fear is they will reject me. I'm not good enough just as I am.
Yeah, that's such an interesting insight. We have this idea that I don't accept myself increases my desperation for you to accept me because there's this gap, there's this hole that I'm trying to get you to fulfill.
Yeah.
Dr. Zoe Shaw, the author of Stronger in the Difficult Places, Heal Your Relationship with Yourself by Untangling Complex Shame, comes out in September, I believe.
It's available for pre-order everywhere right now.
Wonderful. And I do have to finish by asking the question I ask all of my guests, which is, what do you wish everyone knew about love?
I wish everyone knew that you will experience the greatest freedom and your love when you actually allow someone to love all of who you are. When you release the fear that you will not be loved if you show up exactly how you are, then you will have that beautiful freedom. That's what I wish everybody knew. And that you are lovable, just as you are. You are lovable.
My heart is so warm just hearing that sentiment. Thank you so much, Dr. Zoe Shaw, for coming onto the show. For our listeners that want to learn more about you, how can they find you?
They can find me at all the social handles, Dr. Zoe Shaw, DrZoeShaw. They can find me at my podcast, Stronger in the Difficult Places. And they can also buy my book, Stronger in the Difficult Places, on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any of the places.
All connected.
All connected. And my website is the same, drzoeshaw.com.
Well, I feel stronger in the difficult places with your encouragement to not hide in our relationships, to find that courage to share those things that we are most hesitant to share because of how healing that is. Well, thanks again, Dr. Zoe Shaw, for coming on to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on, Zach, and thank you for everything that you're doing for relationships.
And thank you, listeners, so much for listening. I hope you remember all of the valuable lessons that Dr. Zoe shared with us today, including guilt is an emotion around the feeling of doing something wrong. It can be productive in helping us right that wrong. But shame is an emotion that says, I am wrong, and it is always unhealthy. There is simple shame, which disappears when we talk about it to someone and are received with compassion. Meanwhile, there is complex shame, which doesn't go away because it is a deep part of our identity. Shame causes us to hide, and people frequently experience shame in the realms of spirituality, sexuality, body image, and their careers. So, shame-proof your relationship by speaking the hard things, having the hard conversations, and allowing your partner to see you. And although it might be challenging during the beginning, it becomes easy and natural later on. It helps to address these issues regularly, such as with a weekly all-in meeting, where you can do 3 things. 1, appreciate each other. 2, think about what you both can do differently. And 3, express how your partner can love you throughout the following week. And don't forget, you will experience the greatest freedom and love when you let someone love you in all that you are. And remember, you are perfect just the way you are. You are lovable, loving, and loved.
Thanks again for listening to the Learn to Love podcast. To learn more about the show and your host, head over to zachbeach.com or theheartcenter.com. You can also follow Zach on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.